craziest road rage stories you won't believe. This is Mr. H. You're listening to Masked Horror. The Long Drive Home, based on true events. It was a frigid November evening when Alex decided to take the scenic route home through the winding back roads of western Pennsylvania. The trees, stripped of their leaves, cast skeletal shadows on the pavement, illuminated only by the moonlight and his headlights. The road was notoriously empty at this hour, which suited Alex just fine after a long, grueling day at work. As he rounded a bend, his headlights caught the glare of a car stopped in the middle of the road. Its hazard lights blinked rhythmically, piercing the darkness. Alex slowed his car to a stop, irritation mingling with concern. He honked lightly, expecting the vehicle to move aside, but it remained stationary. Sighing, Alex unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out into the chilly air. He approached the vehicle, his breath visible in the cold night. As he neared, he could see the silhouette of a figure slumped over the steering wheel. His irritation quickly turned to worry. "Hey, are you okay?" he called out, tapping on the window. There was no response. The figure remained motionless. Alex tried the door, found it unlocked, and opened it cautiously. The cabin light flickered on, revealing a man with blood streaming down his face from a gash on his forehead. Panic surged through Alex as he checked for a pulse. Still there, but weak. Fumbling with his phone, Alex dialed emergency services. As he spoke to the dispatcher, he heard the faint sound of an engine in the distance. He glanced up, expecting help, but instead, another car sped toward him, headlights blazing. It didn't slow down as it approached. Instead, it swerved wildly, heading straight for him. Alex jumped back, narrowly avoiding the car as it crashed into the stalled vehicle. The impact sent a shudder through the ground. The sound of crumpling metal and shattering glass filled the air. Alex, heart pounding, saw the driver of the speeding car, a woman, staggering out of the vehicle, screaming incoherently. Her eyes were wild, her face contorted in rage. It's all your fault," she shrieked at him. Confusion and fear gripped Alex as he tried to approach her to calm her down. "I didn't do anything," he protested. But she lunged at him, pushing him to the ground. Her hands closed around his throat, squeezing tightly. His attempts to pry her off were futile. Her strength was unusually powerful. As Alex's vision began to blur, headlights approached from around the bend. The woman's attention broke, and she released her grip, stumbling back into the road. A truck roared down, the driver unable to stop in time. The horrifying thud as the vehicle hit her was the last thing Alex heard before darkness claimed him. When Alex woke, he was in a hospital bed. His neck was bandaged and his body ached. A police officer sat beside him, explaining what had happened. The woman, they told him, had been involved in several hit-and-run incidents that night, fueled by a dangerous combination of alcohol and uncontrolled rage. Her final act had not only ended her life, but had left the man in the other car, the first victim, paralyzed. Alex listened, a heavy guilt settling in his chest. He had survived, but the randomness and violence of the night haunted him. The roads he once found solace in now seemed menacing, a reminder that rage could lurk around any corner, waiting to turn an ordinary drive home into a nightmare. Rage in the Rearview. The night had fallen heavy over the city as Jenna, a late shift nurse, left the hospital exhausted after her shift. The streets were quieter than usual, a thick fog settling over the roads, dampening sounds and blurring the glow of the streetlights. As Jenna drove onto the highway, her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden rumble of an engine from behind. A car flashed its headlights aggressively, urging her to move faster. Jenna, trying to maintain her composure, checked her speed. She was already at the limit. She gestured apologetically through her rearview mirror, hoping to convey her unwillingness to speed. The other driver didn't take it well. The car accelerated, swerving around her before cutting sharply in front, nearly clipping her bumper. Jenna's heart raced. She tapped her brakes instinctively, slowing down to put some distance between them. But the aggressive driver had other plans. The car slowed down, mirroring her speed, trapping her behind. Jenna's unease turned into fear. She thought about pulling over, but the desolate highway stretched empty in both directions, the next exit miles away. The driver's behavior grew more erratic, braking intermittently and swerving slightly as if taunting her. Jenna's grip tightened on the steering wheel, her other hand reaching for her phone to call the police. As she dialed, the other car stopped abruptly. Jenna braked hard, her phone clattering to the floor, and barely avoided a collision. Her heart pounding, Jenna watched as the driver stepped out of the vehicle, a large, imposing figure, obscured partially by the fog. He began walking towards her, and panic surged through Jenna. She knew she had to get away. As the figure approached, she floored the accelerator, swerving around the stopped car and speeding down the highway. The figure quickly returned to their car and gave chase. Jenna's mind raced as she navigated the foggy highway, the other car relentless in pursuit. She could see the next exit sign looming ahead. Just a bit further, she could escape. Suddenly, her pursuer attempted to ram her from the side. Jenna swerved, losing control as her car skidded across the wet pavement. The world spun violently. A cacophony of screeching tires and shattering glass filled her senses until everything went black. Jenna awoke to the sounds of distant sirens. Her car was in a ditch, the front crumpled against a tree. She was bruised and disoriented, but alive. As the fog of confusion lifted, she remembered the chase, the rage-filled driver. The police arrived, and through their investigation, they discovered the aggressive driver had abandoned his car and fled. Inside, they found an array of weapons and notes detailing planned acts on random motorists to vent his fury at perceived slights. Jenna had escaped, but the shock of the ordeal lingered. She learned that her attacker had been involved in numerous similar accidents, his anger escalating each time. The police feared it was only a matter of time before he struck again, his rage unquenched. Haunted by her narrow escape and the reality of unchecked rage on the roads, Jenna's life took a turn. The once comforting solitude of night drives now harbored unseen threats. The rearview mirror, a constant reminder of the night she raced against rage. Yellow warning. Claire had always loved her bright yellow car, a beacon of cheer, especially on gray days. Little did she know, it made her the target of a meticulously plotting predator. It was a stormy Tuesday evening when Claire left her office in downtown. As she merged onto the highway, the rain poured relentlessly on her windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. She was eager to get home, curl up with a good book, and listen to the rain against the windows. As she drove, Claire noticed headlights in her rearview mirror, approaching quickly. A black SUV closed in, its front almost touching her bumper. Claire's heart skipped. She hated being tailgated, especially in such poor visibility. She tapped her brakes gently, a signal for the driver to back off. Instead, the SUV edged closer. Anxiety twisted in her stomach. Claire switched lanes, hoping the driver would pass. The SUV followed. She switched back, and again, it followed. A prickling sensation crawled up her spine. This was no ordinary road rage. She was being targeted. Claire's thoughts raced. She remembered a news piece about a series of unsolved disappearances. Women driving alone, specifically in yellow cars, vanishing without a trace. Another chill ran down her spine as she realized she fit the profile. Panicking, Claire dialed 911, but couldn't connect due to poor reception in the storm. Her only option was to drive to a populated area. The nearest town was miles away, and the SUV was relentless. Every turn she made, it was right there, mirroring her moves like a shadow. As the miles stretched, Claire's fear escalated. She thought of driving to a police station, but wasn't sure she could make it without being forced off the road. The isolation of the highway left her painfully vulnerable. Suddenly, the SUV accelerated, pulling up beside her. Claire glanced over, her breath catching at the sight of the driver, a man, his face obscured by a hood, his eyes cold and unyielding. He stared at her, then abruptly swerved towards her car. Claire reacted instinctively, swerving away, but the wet road betrayed her. Her car spun out of control, tires hydroplaning on the slick surface. The last thing she saw was the headlights of the SUV charging towards her before everything went black. The predator, known as the Sun Stalker, approached Claire's wrecked car with calculated steps. The night had hidden his sinister work well, and now, shrouded in the aftermath, he was ready to enact the next phase of his twisted ritual. Claire was unconscious, slumped over the steering wheel, her car a crumpled mess against the tree. The impact had shattered the window, and rain had soaked her face, mixing with blood from a cut on her forehead. The man paused, observing her helplessly tangled in the wreckage. This was a scene he had orchestrated many times before. With precise movements, he opened her damaged car door. Claire, trapped in a daze of shock and injury, was barely conscious, her senses dulled by fear and pain. He spoke softly, a chilling calmness in his voice. "It's okay, you're going to be fine," manipulating his tone to soothe as he reached for her, pretending to be a rescuer amidst the horror. But instead of aiding, he fastened a cloth soaked in chloroform over her mouth and nose. Claire's instincts screamed for her to fight, but her body failed her, succumbing to the chemical's overpowering effects. As her world slipped into darkness, her last thread of consciousness was filled with the horror of her vulnerability. The man worked quickly now, knowing the storm would have kept most travelers at home. He knew the late hour provided an extra veil. He carefully removed Claire from her car, ensuring not to leave any of his own DNA behind. He placed her in the back of his SUV, which was equipped with restraints he had meticulously prepared for such occasions. Once Claire was secured, he drove off into the night, leaving behind no trace of his presence except for the mangled yellow car, a grim marker of his passing. His destination was a secluded cabin deep in the woods, a place he had customized for his horrific pursuits. There, Claire would awake to the reality of her plight, far from any hope of rescue, at the mercy of a predator who had turned the ritual of hunting into a macabre art form. When the storm cleared, a passing trucker called in a wreck off the highway. Police found Claire's car crushed against a tree, the yellow paint stark against the dark, wet bark. There was no sign of the black SUV, and Claire was nowhere to be found. Claire slowly regained consciousness, her mind foggy and her limbs weak. She found herself in a small, stark room, devoid of windows and furnished only with a metal chair and a dim overhead light that cast more shadows than it dispelled. The chilling silence of the cabin was punctuated only by her shallow, uneasy breaths. As her vision cleared, the grim reality set in. She was not in a hospital or a safe place. She was somewhere sinister. Her wrists and ankles were bound tightly with ropes, the coarse material biting into her skin. Panic surged through her as she realized her vulnerability and the precision with which her captor had arranged this terrifying scenario. The cabin was filled with disturbing paraphernalia, newspaper clippings of missing women, maps with routes highlighted in fluorescent colors, and photos of yellow cars, each a trophy of his conquests. This room, his macabre studio, was where he reveled in the control and fear he wielded over his victims. Hours passed, or it might have been days. Claire couldn't tell. The isolation and uncertainty gnawed at her psyche, each minute stretching into an eternity of dread. Then the door creaked open, and the Sunstalker entered, his presence more menacing than Claire had imagined. He was methodical and calm, traits that made him even more terrifying. He began to speak in a cold, detached voice, detailing his twisted philosophy. He saw himself as an artist of fear, curating experiences that stripped hope and illuminated the fragility of life. His fixation on yellow cars and their drivers, he explained, stemmed from a deep-seated resentment towards what they represented, happiness and brightness on his darkest days. To him, Claire and her car were symbols of the sunshine he felt compelled to extinguish. Claire listened, horror-stricken, as he recounted his past exploits, each story punctuated by a chilling smile. He didn't touch her physically during these monologues, but the psychological torment of his words was its own form of torture. Claire realized that her survival depended not on just physical escape, but on maintaining her mental resilience against his dark narratives. As the stalker prepared to leave the room, promising to return, Claire's mind raced for solutions, her fingers working tirelessly at the ropes. Pain flared in her wrists, but the fear of what awaited spurred her on. She knew that her chances were slim, but the faint hope of escape was all she had to cling to in the darkness. Claire's fate remained uncertain, her life hanging in the balance as she battled both her bindings and the despair that threatened to consume her. The outside world remained oblivious to her plight, the cabin a perfect prison for the Sunstalker's sinister pursuits. The police investigation uncovered a chilling pattern. The predator had been targeting yellow cars for a decade, each associated with a missing woman, and they also never found Claire ever again. The town mourned another missing soul, the case growing colder as the man in the black SUV hunted for his next yellow target. The roads no longer safe for women like Claire, who once found joy in their bright, cheerful cars. Have you seen Claire? Stay safe.